It's 1 o'clock. And at this point, I think we'll just stick on our schedule and start moving into the next presentation, which will be case review of pertinent Southwest investigations. And our speaker today regarding this presentation will be DeLiven Roper, who is a special agent with the Fish and Wildlife Service out of Las Cruces, New Mexico. He's now the acting supervisor for Arizona and New Mexico. And so, DeLiven, I'll turn it over to you.
10-4, thanks, Robert. Just real quickly, as soon as we get Bobby's screen off, I'll put mine to share. But thank you, everyone, for allowing us to participate. It's an honor for us to get called in to assist with the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society and providing these presentations. So thank you all. We appreciate it. As Robert said before at the beginning of all the presentations, if anybody has any questions, comments during the presentation, feel free to chime in, or you can raise your hand and Robert will help facilitate that because I will miss it. So we'll work it out some way together.
Yeah, feel free to use the chat as well. I'll be monitoring that.
Give me just a sec to get this set up just right. Are you seeing the presentation there, Robert? Or is it still?
Yes, it's on.
Okay. All right. So basically, I'm going to give an overview of some of the Fish and Wildlife Service cases we have here in the Southwest that are ongoing with the various tribes. Obviously, it's going to focus mainly on Arizona and New Mexico. There's a few active investigations we've got going on. I can provide some updates too. But what I'm also going to do is kind of transition into working joint investigations with us, as that's probably something that folks have questions about. So at any point, like I said, feel free to chime in, ask questions, and we'll go from there. So I'll go ahead and start with the state of Arizona. Currently, we have a case with the Hopi Reservation, in which we have a case titled Nicotiwa Farrell, in which in July of 2020, the Chandler agent received a report from the Hopi Law Enforcement Services of a golden eagle that was to be used for ceremonial purposes that had been stolen by a tribal member. The suspect was identified as a tribal member. We went out, we conducted interviews, but no admissions were ever obtained. The agent for this case has submitted a request for approval to prosecute to the Department of Interior's Office of Solicitor. So we are still kind of currently waiting to hear back regarding that matter. And hopefully we'll hear something soon. We have another case with the San Carlos Apache tribe. This one's called the San Carlos Reservation poaching case. In September of 2020, the Chandler agent received a report from the San Carlos Apache tribe officers of several individuals who were apprehended on the San Carlos Apache Reservation while they were spotlighting and poaching deer. The individuals, all of whom were non-tribal members, had been camping on the White Mountain Apache Reservation, though there were no violations on that side of the boundaries. The San Carlos officers did a great job in collecting physical evidence, and they've transferred that over to the special agent who has submitted those items to the National Fish and Wildlife Forensics Lab for analysis. We're still waiting. It's kind of a drawn out process because it's DNA that's involved. So because of that, it's going to take a little bit of time before we get that information back. But the agent is pursuing that investigation, so we're hoping to get some good results on that. But a great job by the San Carlos and the White Mountain Apache, both in their collecting of evidence and interviewing the subjects and so forth. This was kind of a tough case because there were some language barriers. The individuals are not native to the United States, so there was some communication issues, but the tribal officers did an excellent job, so kudos to them. We have one with the Havasupai, titled the Havasupai Antler Sheds. In March of 2021, the Chandler agent received a referral from the FBI regarding an individual who had been apprehended on the Havasupai Indian Reservation for unlawfully collecting antler sheds. This subject had also threatened the ranger, the tribal ranger, with a firearm, which is kind of where it got bounced over to us. It was a joint investigation, which resulted in the subject being issued a violation notice, which is basically a citation by a BIA officer. And there's still some discussion with the U.S. Attorney's Office whether further action is going to be taken. So that's kind of where it's at the moment. The violation notice has been issued by the BIA officer, but the U.S. Attorney's Office is looking into the matter a little bit further. So there's a little bit more to this case as we move forward. With the White Mountain Apache tribe, we had an investigation titled A3 Trophy Hunts. This one is basically in September of 2015. The Chandler Special Agent received a report of trespassing and the unlawful taking of a trophy bull elk on the White Mountain Apache Reservation by a non-tribal member. The case was presented to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution, and ultimately the defendant was convicted of a misdemeanor Lacey Act traffic violation. He was recently sentenced to 2 years probation in order to pay a $16,000 restitution fine to the White Mountain Apache tribe. The bull elk trophy was also returned to the tribe, so they can do with as they were going to do so. But it was a great sentence, mainly in the way of the restitution. So great job to the agents on that case. Bouncing over to New Mexico, we've been working with the Navajo Nation on a case called Operation Smudge Feather. This is still ongoing, but basically in 2018, the Albuquerque Special Agent opened a case to investigate the trafficking of eagles and their parts. To date, there have been 4 subjects that have been charged in federal court. Another aspect of this case involves the discovery of numerous live eagles on the Navajo agricultural products industry farmlands, in which a lot of those eagles have been shot and their tail feathers removed from the birds, whether the bird was dead or alive. So this investigation continues. There's a lot of different moving parts on this case, but we've been working closely with the Navajo Nation in trying to solve some of these eagle shootings, especially and S.A. Ruiz has been doing a great job in working the trafficking side of stuff as well too. Also on the Navajo Nation, we had one case that was recently successfully completed, the White Horse investigation. This one stemmed from a 2017 report. The Albuquerque agent received a request from the Navajo Nation to assist in the prosecution of a tribal member that was involved in the poaching of a mule deer. The defendant ultimately pled guilty to a Lacey Act misdemeanor charge. A great part of the success of the investigation was based on the great investigative work completed by the late Eddie Benally, who was a tribal officer there on the Navajo Nation at the time. Eddie did an outstanding job in his interviewing, documenting the evidence, providing us with the tribal law that helped us show the underlying law that was violated, so we can implement the Lacey Act, as Adrian had kind of explained earlier in her presentation. So great investigation with some great results there. There's currently one on the Santa Ana Pueblo, the Leon Ustes case in 2019 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The agent was notified of a gyr falcon that had been shot by tribal members on the Santa Ana Pueblo. The falcon belonged to a falconer who was flying the bird in the area. The case has since been referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office for federal prosecution. Again, the individual that shot the bird was a tribal member, but the falconer himself is not a tribal member. So that one's being looked at a little bit further. It's got a lot of moving parts as well, but still ongoing. Also in New Mexico, we have one on the Mescalero Apache Reservation titled the Inn of the Mountain Gods Elk case. In 2019, the Las Cruces Special Agent received a report from the Mescalero Apache tribe of several members having unlawfully killed and transported cow elk from the Inn of the Mountain Gods Golf Resort. Subjects included both tribal members and non-tribal members. Interviews were conducted on the reservation of these folks, in which several confessions were obtained during the interviews. Currently, this case has been presented to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution, and there's also been some referrals to the tribal courts for the prosecution of the tribal members. This is still ongoing and currently at the U.S. Attorney's Office at the moment. Are there any questions regarding the cases I just discussed? I know I kind of flew through those pretty quick. And I'll kind of defer to Robert here. Seem to have lost my Zoom screen where everybody's at. So
That's all right. I don't see anybody asking any questions in the chat or raising hands right now, Deliven, but going back to just that overview of some of the cases that you guys have pursued for the tribe or different tribes. Oh boy, I just lost my train of thought. It had to do with tribal court. Can you explain a little bit about how that process works as far as the tribal officers kind of holding back a little bit on any of those tribal charges when you're dealing with cases together collaboratively, so they don't influence a decision that's made at the U.S. Attorney's Office for further prosecution?
Right. Usually when we're working these joint investigations, we usually, discuss with the officers and try to come up with, what's the statute of limitations on both the tribal side and on the federal side. We usually have a 5-year period. So we try to discuss, what is the statute of limitations on the tribal side, which is usually a lot shorter than the 5-year period. We do try to coordinate that we have these discussions with the U.S. Attorney's Office prior to presenting the case to the tribal courts, only because there are many instances where if an individual has already been charged by the tribal courts, the U.S. Attorney's Office won't take that case, even if we might have gotten better penalties on the federal side. So we usually try to work that information out ahead of time and decide, okay, maybe in this instance, it's better to take the tribal members straight to the tribal courts, and we'll handle those that are non-tribal members in the federal court. And that's kind of the way it works in the Mescalero case, is the U.S. Attorney's Office decided not to pursue charges on the tribal member and rather let the tribes handle that side of the house. And we are taking the non-tribal members as far as the federal prosecution. But we definitely like to have those conversations before anything is presented to the courts. So just as kind of as a segue to that.
Thanks, Deliven. Does anybody have any other questions right now at this time with the information that Deliven has covered to this point?
All good?
Yep.
All right, I'll keep on moving forward. So
okay.
Kind of leading from those investigations that I presented, and I know there was just a few, it was pretty brief, but I kind of wanted to lead into working joint investigations together as far as Fish and Wildlife Service, Office of Law Enforcement, and the tribes. I think we work pretty well with our tribes, but there are probably some folks that may be new, maybe to tribal law enforcement, that have never worked with us, and this could be information that's beneficial, or just a recap of stuff, maybe new ideas and so forth. So some of the information I'll talk about is, what are some of the different type of joint investigations we can work together. One that came to mind was, migratory bird hunting operations. I'm sure several of the tribes do offer migratory bird hunts on their lands. I know in the Navajo Nation, we have, a lot of waterfowl comes into some of the water sources up there. So we can try to work, our migratory bird hunting operations together, whether it be dove, waterfowl, whatever it may be. This can include, joint surveillance operations, maybe saturated patrols with uniformed officers. We can do coordinated patrols, maybe even on the boundaries of the reservation and state land or private lands, federal lands. We could also do covert operations. Us as Fish and Wildlife federal agents, we are plainclothes officers, so we are never really in a uniform. Our vehicles are all unmarked, so we can get into some areas that maybe some of your uniform patrol units can't get into. So there may be something to consider in doing that kind of stuff. Also, for what we call takedowns, if we needed to move into an area that maybe there's a lot of hunters, we can kind of saturate that area with numerous units rather than trying to have one uniformed officer make all those contacts and stuff. Migratory bird and or eagle take possession sale investigations. A lot of times the tribal officers may be called upon to respond to the reports. A lot of this stuff gets called into whatever offices people know who to call. In my area, for instance, most of these phone calls or reports will go to the Game and Fish office before they call my office. And the same may be occurring on the tribal lands. You know, you may get the report, we've got a dead eagle, or there's somebody that's capturing a bunch of live birds, and they may call the tribal conservation officers before they would contact us. So we would ask for assistance in responding to those reports. We can coordinate surveillance operations again, covert operations, the execution of search warrants. You know, maybe we've got somebody that that captured, let's say they captured a live golden eagle. They have it in their possession. The tribe realizes that that individual is not permitted to do so, and they can't do that. You know, we can assist in executing search warrants with the tribal officers to secure that evidence, get that eagle in our possession, and conduct our investigation. We can work in coordination with the takedowns again, and then promote compliance. You know, just because we do an investigation doesn't always mean that we need to put handcuffs on somebody. It may just be that maybe the person was unaware that they can't be out trapping a migratory songbird. You know, for all we knew, they just wanted to keep it in a cage in their patio area, and they like the way the bird sings. That happens more times than not, and just people are just uneducated into some of our laws and statutes. So we can work that kind of information together. Agent Ruiz kind of mentioned earlier about reptiles, but one thing we could also focus on is our ESA take and sale investigations. In that photo you see out there up towards the left, you know, that's all cacti, which was removed from a national park. But we have a lot of intel that shows that these type of incidences are occurring on tribal lands as well too, especially here in the Southwest, where we got tons of cactus. So these are operations we can work together, whether we do buy bust operations involving endangered species. And again, that can apply to our mammals, our reptiles, our birds, our plants. We can do surveillance. One of the big cactus cases that we had really required a lot of bodies to actually do surveillance, as the individuals that were collecting these cactus plants and or seeds flew into Los Angeles, traveled all the way through Arizona, into New Mexico, into South Texas, back up into New Mexico, into Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and back to California to fly back to the Netherlands. So as you can tell, trying to do surveillance, you know, 1 or 2 officers covering 6 states it was next to impossible. So we really had to rely on a lot of other resources, whether it was from Park Service, BLM, tribal officers on the Navajo Nation assisted us in these surveillance operations. So it's always kind of bringing our resources together is the big thing we can try to do. Again, covert operations, if you know of somebody that's maybe dealing in these cactus issues, if you need somebody to go in plain clothes and do an undercover purchase and we can help build that case together, reach out to us. This is the kind of stuff we can do. Maybe there are times that, you know, maybe the plant that is being dealt with is maybe something that's used by a specific tribe. Maybe we can use a tribal member to help us in showing that those items are being unlawfully sold and purchased and so forth. And again, the coordinated patrols. If we know there's an area that's being hit hard with the cactus, with the reptiles, you know, we can do coordinated patrols between the multiple agencies, and it makes us more effective in that regard. Lacey Act, you know, Adrian talked about the interstate transport, the unlawful take, and this takes a lot of coordination and working these cases. As I've mentioned in everything that we've talked about so far, you know, the covert operations, overt operations, surveillance, it's all coordination among everybody, all the agencies, all the tribes. And there's only one way to catch a lot of this stuff. You know, a lot of these things are occurring across all the boundaries, whether it be tribal boundaries, federal boundaries, state boundaries, even international boundaries. I know we have some of our tribes that are on the southern Arizona that bounder up against Mexico. You know, we have intel reports of folks that are smuggling reptiles through those boundaries. So these coordinations among the tribes and ourselves is really important. The other thing we can also help with would be with interviews. If for some reason we do have like a Lacey Act violation that has occurred on tribal lands by a non-tribal member who has now gone back to his home city, which is, maybe 2 states away, we can assist in coordinating interviews to be conducted where the individual resides. That may not always be easy for the tribes to send a person out there, or they may not have authority to do so. And that's kind of where Lacey Act is really important and kind of comes in. Agent Ruiz mentioned the commercial collection of reptiles. Again, we can coordinate all these different investigative techniques to address these issues. Surveillance, covert operations, overt operations, the patrols, takedowns, intel gathering. The photos that you'll see there on the 2 bottom photos, I show the rattlesnake to reference the reptiles, but the photo over to the left is a coordinated operation we did with New Mexico Game and Fish and New Mexico State Police, in which we had an individual that was transporting not just reptiles, but actually an endangered species, the red-nosed rattlesnake. The individual had collected it in Mexico, smuggled it into the United States, into Texas, and then ultimately was transporting it back into Arizona. So we were able to run a mobile surveillance on these individuals, but it was next to impossible to do with just 2 officers. So we ended up coordinating with Game and Fish and State Police to assist with some of the surveillance and ultimately to do what we called a simple traffic stop, which allowed us to get more intel as to where were the guys taking the snake to, what kind of snakes did they possess, did they have any type of permits. It was really important information that we were able to receive for the investigation based on this type of coordination. It's the same type of coordination we can do with the tribes. I know I've done it numerous times with Mescalero Apache. We try to do so with Navajo Nation. A lot of the tribes we work with jointly in these type of things. A couple things to consider when you're working joint investigations with Fish and Wildlife Service. The response and assistance with an investigation is going to depend on the agent's availability and caseload. Now, it's I know for some folks it can be frustrating. They may call us and be like, hey, I called you guys, but I haven't received a response. You got to understand that we are a small agency and usually covering large areas of responsibility. And we're also working with several different agencies. I myself currently, have 13 active investigations, but I'm working with the Department of Homeland Security, our wildlife inspectors, New Mexico Game and Fish, Mescalero Apache. It's on and on. So there's multiple people that we're dealing with. So it's not just that one tribe that's contacting us. So all we ask is that you be patient. We will definitely try to assist where we can, but it is going to depend on our availability and our caseload. This is just to kind of give a reference as to, several years ago, this was kind of the boundaries that were set up for the agents. And I give New Mexico as an example. But at the time, we had an agent in Las Cruces, 2 agents in Albuquerque that could divvy up the northern part of the state, and an agent in Arizona that was help covering one of the counties in New Mexico. So essentially 4 agents covering the state. That was in 2009. In 2011, we had kind of a mass transfer and retirements and so forth went on to the point that there was 1 agent covering the entire state of New Mexico. So as you can tell, things get a little, we got to kind of pick and choose. We can't take every case at that point because we were limited on our resources. Fortunately, now that we're back at the present time, there are 2 of us in the state of New Mexico, but Adrian Ruiz and myself, we're splitting up one of the largest states that we have in the country between the 2 of us. And the same applies for Arizona at the moment. If you reach out to us, the agent may be advised that we can't assist with an investigation due to our agency priorities or budget constraints. Now this, most of the time, working with the tribes is a priority for us. So it's rare that this happens that we need to turn away based on agency priorities, but there could be impacts with budget constraints. I remember years and years ago, we couldn't travel to places because there was just no money to do so. The other thing is we as federal agents are sometimes called forward for what they call ESF 13 deployments. When anytime there's a national emergency going on, such as the hurricanes when they hit the East Coast, we are activated to go provide security or some type of force security to these events. So that limits our time and our availability many times as well too. So just things to consider. If for some reason an agent turns down an investigation, don't give up and call in the agent in the future. It may just be that that case didn't have a federal nexus after we looked at it. You know, it may have sounded like it was a Lacey Act case, but after we did more digging and we looked at the tribal laws and the federal laws, we kind of determined, yeah, it really wasn't there. Or maybe the U.S. Attorney's Office has told us, you know, yeah, we talked about the case, we're not going to prosecute it. So it's not always that we just didn't want the case. There may be other things happening in the background, but don't give up. You know, just because we say no to one case doesn't mean we're going to say no to every case. It's happened many times. I work with Mescalero quite a bit, obviously, where I'm located, and they call me all the time. We work through the cases. There are several that we have to turn down just because there's not that federal nexus. But then there's some great ones that come out of our coordination. And those guys never stop calling me, no matter, you know, how many times we say yay or nay, they're always calling. So great group to work with. Understand, as we as investigators with our investigations, a lot of times they may take several years to complete. It all depends on the objective and the direction that the investigation takes. So as uniformed patrol officers, a lot of time those cases happen quickly and, you know, may get resolved within a couple months. But when we're doing a lot of our long-term investigations, our stuff can drag on from 2 years to 5 years. It's just the nature of the beast, depending on what our objective is. If we're dealing with a large poaching ring, it may take a while. As you saw in the case from Albuquerque and the Navajo Nation, Operation Smudge Feather, that case has been going on for several years now. And it's just trying to find all the different players and everything that's tied to it. So a lot of these things take a long time. So just be patient with that. Okay. It's not that we're dragging our feet or nothing. It's just gathering the intel and everything, putting it all together takes some time. Joint investigations should always be discussed prior to the start of an investigation. Basically, we do this so that there's no confusion as to each agency's role or in which court prosecution will be sought. You know, Robert asked, you know, well, you know, how do we determine who's going to take the tribal prosecution or the federal prosecution? And these are the conversations we need to have right at the beginning of the investigation. So that way there's no, you know, the tribe goes and presents it before we were ready to do it federally. And then now we've run into a roadblock to what our objective was. So we've always got to have those discussions beforehand. So, you know, call everybody together. If supervisors need to be present, that's fine. But if nothing else, at the very least, the tribal officer and the agent can meet, discuss, come up with a game plan. This is what we're going to do. This is what we'll need from this agency. This is what we'll need from this agency. And just always kind of have a plan. And communication is key in running these investigations. One thing we do ask is that if we are working a joint investigation together, it is important to get all of the supporting documentation together to the assisting agent and as quickly as possible. Now, I know a lot of times reports are written up, they've got to go through an approval process, and we understand that. But, you know, if there's any supervisors on this conference, you know, just keep that in mind. If some of that stuff can be done in a timely manner, we would appreciate it. As far as documentation, this includes reports, photographs, any other documents that pertain to your investigation. A lot of time, those documents help us to initiate our case, and we need to get that stuff immediately. Otherwise, we can't really just go based on a phone call, you know, where there's not a whole lot of data or information as to what's going on. So we really kind of depend on those field reports. When we're dealing with the U.S. Attorney's Office for joint investigations, we ask that Fish and Wildlife Service, Office of Law Enforcement, be the lead point of contact to the U.S. Attorney's Office and to the assigned U.S. Attorney. This is just kind of a preference from the U.S. Attorney's offices. They deal with us day in and day out. They know what things we can present, can't present, the federal rules of evidence and so forth. So we ask, just out of respect, that you allow us to be the lead agency in presenting stuff to the U.S. Attorney's Office. If a tribal officer wants to go with me, you know, to present a case or to discuss a case, I will gladly invite you. We've done so in the past with even our state counterparts. But again, we should be the primary point of contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Understand that even if a joint investigation is completed, The U.S. Attorney's Office may decline to prosecute the case. So it's not always up to us on whether the case gets prosecuted or not. It's up to the U.S. Attorney's Office. This may be based on the U.S. Attorney's Office caseloads, their priorities, or their thresholds. Sometimes, and it's a frustrating aspect for us as well too, but you know, we may not meet a threshold for that specific office, whether it be a dollar amount, the number of animals that were killed, so forth. So these are just some of the hurdles we have to kind of go over sometimes, but it's a reality of our cases. Some of the reasons they may also decline our cases may be due to case law, depending on the circumstances of the investigation. In dealing with this recent one with the Mescalero, you know, I was hoping that we could prosecute everybody in the case federally. But in discussing it with the U.S. Attorney's Office, they kind of came across some case law in which they said, well, it'd be preferred if the tribal members were prosecuted tribally for the specific circumstances that we had. So based on that, you know, I can't really argue that because there was case law that supported it. So we've got to comply with what the U.S. Attorney's Office is requesting because they ultimately are the ones taking our cases forward. Understand that the U.S. Attorney's Office may not always seek the maximum penalties listed in a regulation or statute, or the presiding judge may impose a lighter sentence than we as the investigators and officers would prefer. I know sometimes we work a case together and then another agency, whether it be the state agency or tribal agency, may be frustrated and a little upset because they're like, well, we worked this case with you for the last 3 years. We thought we were going to get some serious sentences, and basically it was a slap on the wrist. Understand that's not our say so. We present everything, we present our findings, but ultimately that falls on the U.S. Attorney's Office, whether they want to go for maximum penalties and so forth, and even at that, whether the judge will impose those penalties. You know, based on the sentencing guidelines, you know, an individual that poached 6 elk may just walk away with a $50 fine or something. We never know what's going to happen depending on the judge. So, you know, I understand the frustration. We as the investigators, we want to get, you know, the biggest bang for our buck as well too. But the reality is it's out of our control a lot of times. So we just hope everybody understands that, that it's not that we were trying to seek a lighter sentence. It's just that's the card we were dealt with. Are there any questions?
If anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone. Deliven, can you talk about, you mentioned one success was restitution back to the White Mountain Apaches. Can you talk a little bit about how that process works with the value of animals, especially in those guiding situations where there is an ability to get some money back for the tribes, as they being the victims in those situations?
Yeah. So a lot of times the tribes are recognized as being the victim, as having lost, you know, the trophy bull elk, lost the opportunity to provide revenue for the tribe because that event might have been like a poaching incident. So there are many times that the U.S. Attorney's Office will seek restitution for the tribe. And what we ask is that, you know, we'll reach out to the tribe and ask several questions. One is, can you provide us with what the value of that elk would be? And whether that be, you know, the tag for that elk would have been $5,000. And if they hunted on the tribal or on the tribal lands, would they have been required to hire a tribal guide and outfitter, which could incur another amount? So based on that, those values can increase in helping us seek that restitution value back to the tribe. Again, that kind of fluctuates between attorneys and judges, but that's how we try to seek it. Is if you all have restitution values for your wildlife, that's important to pass on to us, as well as any fees that are involved in a specific country. And we'll ask you those questions when we get to that point. You know, sometimes I know I've called Mescalero and can you guys provide me with what would it have cost for a non-tribal member to go hunting on the reservation? And, it may be $24,000. Then that's restitution we could try to seek back to the tribe.
And that valuation could also, for some reason I got some feedback there, but that valuation could also be used from a sentencing standpoint, not only for restitution, but sentencing as well, correct? Where it could add to a person spending more time in jail or a stiffer penalty just from a sentencing standpoint, separate of the restitution, right?
That is correct. Yeah, those values will help in bringing up, in the sentencing guidelines, there's like a table and a chart. And the more money that was spent, especially if it's a commercial aspect and the guiding and outfitting aspect of stuff, that can bring up that sentencing value higher. So it could increase potential imprisonment time or fines as well. So yes.
Thank you.
Dale? Oh,
yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
That White Mountain case, was that a Lacey case as well?
Yeah, it's not my case, but if I remember right, it was a Lacey Act case that was investigated.
That's what I thought your presentation said, but the value on that animal.
Oh, you still there, Cynthia?
We lost your audio, Cynthia.
Was over $16,000, and yet, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Dale? Yeah, since that was a Lacey case and the value of the animal was over $16,000, can you kind of respond to that, why it was only charged as a misdemeanor?
Again, that falls back, to the presiding judge on what they determine, as well as the sentencing guidelines. So if I remember right in reading this case, and again, it's not my investigation, but that was a decision made by the courts as to the amount. We did propose the full restitution amount, which if I remember right, I want to say it was like 50 grand or something. It was up there. It was pretty good. But that was something that the judge basically brought down themselves based on the sentencing guidelines. And Robert, if I'm correct, I believe you started that investigation, correct?
Right. So we got the information from an anonymous party, but ultimately, you're right. I mean, it was almost double that as far as valuation, but the court was requesting specific numbers based on the fact that it was taken by a non-member who should have been hunting on the state side. There was some guiding fees that were kind of omitted from the overall price. And then the judge actually wanted a breakdown of daily fees in that situation as well. So some of that information was excluded. Some of that valuation was excluded, Cynthia. So ultimately, the guy did pay the restitution. The person who actually shot it did get some immunity based on his compliance in the end. But nonetheless, we did what we could at that point just to get restitution back to White Mountain. Did that help, Cynthia?
I still am not understanding why, in general, anything over $350 could be a felony instead of a misdemeanor, because the animal was worth a lot of money. And I understand about the monetary part of it, because that was under discussion here, but I didn't know it was classified as a misdemeanor.
So, and Robert, I'll let you kind of chime in if you'd like, but if basically, Cynthia, with the 350 value, there's a lot of other factors that play into that, which includes the person's knowledge in the event, And so there's other factors besides just the 350 value as to whether it'll be a felony or a misdemeanor. And Robert, I'll let you kind of elaborate.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, the actual crime can be charged as a misdemeanor, excuse me, as a felony, and a lot of times they are indicted as felony cases. Once the case starts proceeding, there's a lot of negotiation that does take place with defendants and counsel on both sides. And ultimately, the U.S. Attorney's Office will work to settle cases before the cases have to go to trial. Based on all circumstances and of each case, they like to see things taken care of more quickly than not. So in this particular case, they were willing to push forward with getting the restitution to the tribe, dropping it to a lower conviction for the individual, and then move forward and considered it a success. Again, that's their decision. We can argue against that, but ultimately they're going to make the final call in finalizing the case.
Thanks, guys.
You bet.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Robert, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen just for my contact information.
Sure, go ahead.
If anybody needs it or wants it. Again, I'm over in New Mexico, but as Adrian said earlier, if you all have questions, you know, whether or not you're in Arizona or New Mexico, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be glad to answer any questions or refer you to the proper office or agent that can help you out with anything you may have going on.
So in addition to that, if those of you that are on this conference need information for any of the Fish and Wildlife Service special agents that were on the sessions today, you can reach out to me as well, and I can get you that information. My contact information is something that I could probably share through a different avenue for you. So let me do that as well. And give me a little bit of time here. Actually, it's on the WHOVIS site as well, but I'm going to share it right now in the event that you do need it. So there's my email and my cell phone. But again, you know, if there's anything I can do from my position right now with the society, please reach out and I can put you in touch as well with any of the presenters today or anyone else as well.
All right, if there's nothing else, I thank you all for allowing us again to participate in this, and we look forward to maybe presenting again in the future and being a part of the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society trainings and future conferences and so forth. So thank you all, and be safe out there.
Thank you, Deliven. Thank you, Phil, Adrian, Bobby, for all the information you gave us today. It's very beneficial, and again, look forward to working with you guys in the future. Hopefully we can do this in person. For those still attending, this is pretty much the end of our day from the CLEO standpoint, and I think pretty much wrapping things up with the sessions for today as well. Please participate tomorrow. We're looking forward to you guys engaging tomorrow as well. I'll be giving you a little bit of insight on kind of what I'm doing right now for the society as far as the CLEO program. And that's about it. Have a great afternoon and evening, and we will see you all tomorrow. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.